Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are the bottom of page 1279. The Rebbe Rashab has now, one second. Rabbi Rashab, after explaining the idea of schar mitzvah, the energy generated by a mitzvah, which is clear, is schar mitzvah. It's not an outside reward, an incidental reward, but actually the mitzvah itself is its ultimate reward, the full revealed panimius and etzem ha'or of the divine, which is the inner kavanah and inner intention in God, all the way to the helam ha'atzmi, that will be revealed in the future. But yet, and today it's manifest in a garment, in a state of concealment. That's why b'schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka, and even in Gan Eden, it's not the etzem ha'or, it's only a gilui, it's only the that relates to existence. But the asud lavu will be the full gili, in the full, as we elaborated at length what that means, without any garments. Yud K itself, not as it manifests in Mem Sadik in the Chiluf, and the Vav K too will be elevated to Yud K. So then, on page 1277, 1278, and 1279, he explained what type of schar we do have, what gili do we have in Elam Hazeh, in Zman Hazeh. So he said that all of existence is dependent on Torah mitzvahs, but the revelation of it is up to either the level of how much mitzvahs are done, or other factors that would cause it to be more gili, less gili. But la'asid lava, you'll have the full-blown revelation that below will be like above. Ruchnius and Gashmis will be seamless to the point where, even furthermore, that Gashmis, the Kalim, will reveal something and then manifest something that's even higher than the than the Ruchnis. And then at the end of the paragraph that we learned yesterday, 1279, he said, and yet we find, he said, that a me'ain, meaning a similar revelation of what will be in the future, we also have today, meaning in our time, in our history. And he went through Adam HaRishon and Chanoich, and he mentioned the Aves. All of them had a certain type of seamlessness between body and soul, which is similar to what will be in the future. And the K'moy Kain, he said, there come in Neshamas whereas the number of high-grade souls whose bodies were completely refined. Gufim Te'er, their bodies were pure and holy and completely separate from any contamination. And finally, in the parentheses, he spoke about Elam Chatir B'chayecha, that people who have also, in this world, have both in the spiritual and the physical, they have success. And he gave the example in the parentheses of Kamat Tanoim Amaroim that were very wealthy. Rab Tarfon, he mentioned Rabbi Elazar ben Chasim, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbeinu HaKodesh, the teacher of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus, and the Sheresh Kulam, the root of all of them, Yosef HaTzadik, who was a Ish Matzliach, who was successful in this world. They had, in other words, Lamata, the way it is Lamaila. Okay. The next paragraph, which we began learning, he now goes back to the Elu Hadvarim, She'adam Eichel Mehem Peirasein Be'elam Hazeh, V'keren Kayemes Le'elam Haba. This is right at the beginning of the Mishnah in Peah. Peah 8:1:1, the first Mishnah, the first chapter, the first Mishnah, which we say every morning. He starts first the 5 things, Elu Dvarim She'en Lehem Shiur, and then those are 5 things, and then he goes on and enumerates a whole bunch of things, that these are the mad things that a person eats from the fruit in this world, and the principle remains preserved, Keren Kayemes, Le'elam Haba. So the Rebbe Rashab is now explaining that these particular mitzvahs, these particular dvarim, have a certain feature that also has a me'ain of l'asad lava, which is why they're separated and spelled out and distinct from the other mitzvahs. All mitzvahs draw down from Yud K and Vav K, mitzvahs Havai, Yud K, Vav K, but the primary is Vav K and Yud K as it manifests in the Mem Tzadik today. That's what he said. But then there are mitzvahs that you'll have the Yud K as it is in its pure form. So he says, all mitzvahs generate energy and provide some form of reward in this world. But the Shari mitzvahs, the other mitzvahs, not these 10 that he enumerates, their hamshach is from Vav K Shebe Mitzvah Umibchinas Yud K K'meshu B'chiluf Asfen. I'm just reading inside from the new paragraph on page 1279. That Vav K and from Yud K as it's in the exchange of the letters Yud K into Mem Tzadik. Ve'elu ha-mitzvahs Adam Eichel Peresem Shu B'chinas Hatzmich V'izgalas Aram B'chinas Yud K V'ya'ara Atzmis. That we're getting an actual taste or actual semblance, a revelation that's similar to the Yud K that will be L'asad Lavi. And the Keren Kayemes Le'elam Haba, and Keren, he explained what is Keren. Keren means principle and dividends. Paris is dividends, the fruit. Keren is the original principle. But he's teaching Keren also from the word Atzmi. Keren is the level of Atzmi, V'yarim Keren L'amay, that the Atzmi which will be revealed in Elam Haba. So what do we have now? The fruits of that. But it's the fruits directly, not just a reflection as in the Yud K that's in the Mem Tzadik, in the Chiluf. That you actually have the direct fruits of that Keren, of that Atzmi, like he called it Ha'ara Atzmis. And then he began to explain the reason for it, which is what we're middle of learning now. And he's going to spell out some of these items that we have that are unique among mitzvahs. And the first one that we learned was about Kivud Ave'em. So let me just sum up that part, then we'll continue from there. So he said, V'atam, why these things specifically does a person eat and benefit from the fruits in this world, in contrast to other mitzvahs? Remember, Yud K is Chachman Bina. It's the way the Mashpia, how the Oyer is to the Mashpia himself, how he's preparing himself. It's not Vav K, how the Mashpia within him is how he's relating to the Makabel, the Mides and Malchus, Zun, Zah and Malchus. Yud K is Chachman Bina. But Chachman Bina also includes what he calls the Gimel Rishen is also Keser, and the Iker is Keser. The Iker and B'chinas are Keser. So these items enumerated by the Mishnah in Peah, what makes them unique is that these mitzvahs are in the Gimel Rishenis. In other words, they're mitzvahs that relate more. If you remember, they're mitzvahs Teluyim, he said, in the Yud K Vav K. If you recall, he said, Krishma ba'es Yud, Tefillin ba'es Hey. I'm reading from page 1274. So different mitzvahs are all connected to the Yud K Vav K. But there are these ones that he enumerates in the Mishnah, that Eichel Periseyan, are uniquely connected to the three highest levels and primarily to Keser. And that's why when you do those mitzvahs, what is the reward for those mitzvahs? What is mitzvah? The Gili of Gimel Rishen is the Gili of Yud K. Since those mitzvahs are connected to that, that's why you get a hamshachah from Yud K even today, but Elam Hazeh is what now we're going to be learning for the next few pages until page 1281 at the end of the paragraph. So basically, two pages we're now going to go through. We're going to discuss this concept of what we have today from Olam Haba, from L'asad Lavi. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, the reason for this is because we want to know that it's not just something that will just come in the future. We do already have elements of it today. Obviously, it's not revealed as it will be once Mashiach comes in L'asad Lavi in the future in Olam Haba, but we already have something of it, some semblance or some similarity through particular mitzvahs. And before we talked about particular neshamas that had it, unique individuals that had that experience. And now he's talking about particular mitzvahs that draw that unique energy. Okay, so the first one he begins with is Kibud Avim. So Kibud Avim is the mitzvah, Aseres HaDibros, to honor your parents, your father and mother. Now, what is that in Ruchnius? What does it signify? We all know what the mitzvah means in the physical sense of it. Your parents are the ones that gave birth to you. They took care of you. So there's a mitzvah to honor your parents. L'man yarichun yamecha, it says, in order that you should live long on this earth. Okay. So Kibud Avim. But every mitzvah, as we said, is not just a rational mitzvah that makes sense, just like don't steal, don't kill, etc. God forbid. There's also a mitzvah to honor your parents. It's all rooted in Ratzon Elyon. That all mitzvahs are rooted in the higher divine Ratzon, which, by the way, is Keser. But some mitzvahs are connected more to Ratzon as it connects to some of this lower spheres. Here we're talking about Gimel Rishenis. So Kibud Avim is now going to explain the spiritual dimension of what exactly is the significance of Kibud Avim. So what is Abba Imma? Below is a father and a mother that give birth to children. They have offspring. What's Abba Imma and Ruchnius and Atzilus? Abba Imma is Chachma and Bina that give birth to the Midas. Like he explains in Tanya, chapter 3. Together with Das, which is connected to Keser, that gives birth. But it's the father and mother that give birth. So in Ruchnius, it would be Moichin that gives birth to Midas. Or in the language that we're discussing here, Yudke that gives birth to Vavke. So he's going to explain this now, and we'll see from this how the mitzvah is connected to these higher levels all the way to Keser. So I'm going to read, I'm going to read this again inside. We read it yesterday, but it's worthwhile reading again. So he says, Dehine. So I'm reading from the line that begins, Hein begimel Rishenis, a little lower than midway down the page on 1279. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. She says, Dehine Kibud Avim, honoring father and mother, hu b'chachma bina. That mitzvah is a chachma bina. Now remember, mitzvahs, before you learn Kabbalah Chassidus, you hear of a mitzvah, you say, okay, mitzvah is down here. Is the mitzvah to take Daled Minim on Sukkot, to eat matzah on Pesach. Different mitzvahs, different times, or mitzvahs that are all year round. But in Kabbalah Chassidus, it right away focuses on what is the level of this mitzvah. So the level of the mitzvah at Kibud Avim is Chachman Bina. But in Chachman Bina itself, if you recall, we learned there are two ways, two yichudim. There's the yichud pnimi of Chachman Bina, the yichud chitzeni. The yichud chitzeni, to put it in simple balabatisha terms, is when father and mother are taking care of their children. So they're also united, but their focus is on their offspring. Especially the mother. Aim rivetzas ala frechim, the mother hovers over her children. But the father is also involved. Yichud pnimi is their internal, intimate connection, which actually gives birth to children. So there's two stages in yichud. Like we learned on the previous page, we learned about yichud chitzeni is more the yichud that preserves and keeps existence in place. Yichud pnimi is the inner kavanah that mitzvahs draw down, the inner intention, the pnimi of the yichud, which is Torah and mitzvahs, which is the purpose of existence. So Ruchnius, Chachman Bina, has also these two dimensions. That when we talk about Kibud Avim, we're focusing on the Avim as they are the Yichud Pnimi, their inner union, which is to give birth to souls. If you may recall, I'll tell you what page it was back, a while back, where he spoke about the difference between these two Yichudim, and he said one is only generates energy, but it does not create new energy. And Yichud Pnimi, Zivuk Shlim, if you remember, is a Chadash. That draws new energy from Keser, from Arich and Atik, That's when we learn about Chachma Bina gazing, Abba Ve'ima gazing at Arich, at the forehead of Arich, and that drawing down the 370 energies from Atik. So this was back on page, let me tell you where it was. Yeah. Page 1236 is where Rebbe Rashab spoke about this at length. The different yichud, the yichud chetzeni and yichud pnimi. So Kibbutz Aveim is saying is Chachman Bina, but the inner union of Chachman Bina, that's what you're drawing. That's the Ratzon the Elyon. That's the Etzem Mitzvah. Hail Neshamis. Ukiyadua. Again, we learned this yesterday, but I'm just going to elaborate more. That giving birth to something is not just taking care of it. The very genetic structure of the ben comes from the very genetic material, from the etzem, the core mind of the father. As he says explicitly in Tanya chapter 2, and we discussed this also at length briefly, that a son is a child, well, a son really means a child, is not just a reflection of the father. It's not like a teacher teaching intelligence to a student. But here, the very being of the child comes from the very DNA, the very genes of the father and mother, for that matter. But he's focusing on Moyach Av, B'chinas Pnimius Abba Ve'imma, Hanimshech B'chinas Pnimius Ve'atzmus Ein Sof, U'kamoshon Isbar Le'il. Like I said, from page 1236 and on. So this is drawing from the inner Chachman Bina, Abba Ve'imma, which in turn draws from Pnimius Atzmus Ein Sof, as we learned earlier. So that's what Abba Ve'imma is, and the honoring Abba Ve'imma is essentially honoring this dimension, this inner union, and this inner Hamshacha. The Inyan Kibud Aveim. So then what is Kibud Aveim? Now that we've said what Abba Ve'imma is, honoring father and mother is the Hamshacha, because it's the children that are honoring this. So what does that refer to? If Abba Ve'imma is Pnimius, if father and mother, in this case, is the Pnimius of Chachman Bina, the Hamshacha, the Pnimius Atzmus, comes from Pnimius Atzmus Ein Sof. So Kibud Aveim is drawing from that into Zun, Abba Ve'imma L'Zun. But not drawing only the energy, like for example, when the mind is, the cognitive mind is training the emotions. So that's even when the children are young. When the emotions are young, they also need to be guided and trained. That would be Chitzenius Chachman Bina. Pnimius Chachman Bina is when you're drawing from the innermost, deepest cognitive level, that the emotions are now elevating to the intellectual, to the cognitive level, as he's going to say in a moment. So it's mamshich from Abba Ve'imma L'Zon Malchus, v'hu mebchinas Yudkei Levavkei. You're drawing from Yudkei to Vavkei, but not just you're drawing it in the, as I said, the minimal way. If you remember, we learned at length, Mutfa Murgish Muskel, that the early stages when a young child is still instinctive and reflexive and behavioral, the mind is almost not really functioning completely. It's purely the way he's wired. As the child grows, the mind begins to guide and says to the child, you say thank you, you say please, you behave in a more refined and disciplined way. And as the mind grows, the emotions grow with it, and the emotions become more refined till the point that the mind actually is guiding the emotions to places that they themselves would not be there on their own. Because first, the emotions, it's all about me. So the mind tells you that God is good for you because God provides for you. Hu chayecha, he gives you life, he gives you sustenance. But then you come to a point where you start appreciating God, not just what he does for you, that God has a greatness that's beyond you, and the emotions begin to appreciate that. And remember, he said the cognitive emotions, to the point that the emotions grow where they actually send away the mother. Shalach to shalach ha'sa'im. Why? As he explained, because the emotions have now matured to the point that they catapult, and they're like a springboard for the mind, for Bina, the mother, to go back to Chachma and have a yichud pnimi, an inner union, as they access higher new energies coming from Keser. And then the emotions elevate to that level. The emotions drive the mind there, and the mind is also elevating the emotions. And altogether comes that all-consuming love that's beyond the regular faculties. So the subjective emotions have now become completely in love with God, when they began first with loving themselves, the subjective individual. So you see here levels where the mind is still training the emotions, but then there's the emotions as they get elevated. And that's what he's saying is kibud av'eim, that the emotions, meaning vavke, the children, are honoring chachma and bina and being elevated to that level, and drawing from chachma and bina into Zohar Malchus, Yudke the vavke, and that's what it says elsewhere. Huvu k'moshe kosev b'makamacha b'inyan v'heishiv leiv ovis albonim, the bezun yeir v'yizgala kamei ba'Abba v'Imma mamish. That the heart of the parents will return to the children means not just on a minimal level. He says, it's explained elsewhere, that in Zohar Malchus will radiate from the parents, Yizgala the eir of ovis, the heart of the mind will be transferred to the children, to the eir of Abba v'Imma mamish will radiate in Zun, in the bonim. So ovis is chachma and bina, and they will radiate as they are in midas, not in a diminished way. V'hainu shevavke yeh kamei b'chinas yudke, and that's the meaning that vavke will be like level of yudke. That's a la'asad lave revelation. That's not today. Today you have parents and children, or moichin and midas, and the midas are lower than the moichin. Vavke is lower than yudke, and the moichin is mashpia. Moich shalat al alev. The mind controls the heart, guides it, and so on. But then there will be a level, what he's saying, the real kibud av'eim is the mitzvah that reveals how Yudke, how Vavke gets elevated to the level of Yudke. As he says in the Likutei of the Arizal has a sefer also called the Likutei, not to be distinguished from the Likutei of the Alter Rebbe. It's on the Parshas. So he says, "Al pasuk by Yemahu Yiyeh," which I believe is in Scharia. By whom Yiyeh Shem Echad or Shema Echad, he says the bezun Yiyeh Eses Fridas Gamken B'chinas Kvias. That in Zun, Zohar Malchus, which today goes through gradations and more revelation, less revelation. That in the future, by Yemahu Yiyeh, the 10 spheres of Zun will be permanently fixed, kamoi ba'Abba v'Imma, just as Abba v'Imma are permanently fixed. V'oz yeh yudke vavke kama yudke, and that's yiyeh. V'yemahu yiyeh yudke. That the vavke will also be like the yudke. Ayin Mashin is bar liel dibra machal pod v'shalom v'nimtza. So what do we see from this? That kibud av'eim, this mitzvah, nimtza shezeu amitis hagilui dilasid. This is a reflection of the real gilui, the true gilui of the asid canal. That the vavke will be like the yudke. So kibud av'eim gives us some semblance of that, some me'ain of that today. That's why we eat from those peiros be'elam hazeh, distinguished from other mitzvahs. The keren kayemes, the etzem of it will be revealed in Elam Haba. But today we have the peiros, the fruits of that. So that's the power of the mitzvah of kibud av'eim. Okay. And what is this in Avodah? This we also learned. Uba Avedahu, going back, I already said it, but because I referred to pages earlier. In Avodah, this is b'chinas hamuskel, the godless Abba. That this is the level of the mind. Remember, the mind is not just a smart machine. The mind allows us to experience realities that are beyond our subjective perspectives. And godless Abba is the highest level of the mind as it's experiencing a higher reality. So godless Abba, the muscle of godless Abba, when that is shenizbar le'il, that was explained earlier, that kashanimshach b'chinas primis ha'chochma, then when you're able to access primis ha'chochma, chochma is more than just the beginning of wisdom and conception, but as chochma is drawing from the higher reality of kesed, oz hamidas hen l'mayla mahatfa, when you get to that level, the midas are higher than just their natural wiring, their natural genetic makeup. Legamri, and those emotions, which on their own are subjective, but when you reach to this level of Gadlus Abba, which comes after many levels of maturity and growth, as we learned, so now the midas themselves are consumed with elokus, and they also become sichli mamish. So even though they're still midas, but they're on that level of seichel. They're able to see things beyond their own myopic, subjective vision that emotions are trapped in. They're able to see experiences that are divine and be drawn and absorbed by it, as we learned at length much earlier. That's the avodah of what we just said. So the avodah is that kibud Vav is more than just honoring parents. It's actually honoring and elevating to the level of Abba Imma, pnimius Abba Imma, that allows you to experience this level of sichli mamish of atfa. So in other words, honoring parents is elevating from being a child to becoming like the parent. Not like the parent as a parent, but elevating to that level of being completely connected and absorbed by the chachma, the inner chachma bina, which of course leads us to keser and to the higher levels of pnimius atzmus ein sof, as he explained. So in microcosm, kibud Vav captures the very essence of what a mitzvah is, la'asid lavei, and therefore today we eat from its fruits. But he hasn't finished the subject yet. This is where we reached yesterday. But it was worthwhile going over again. But you know what? I'll stop if anybody wants me to clarify anything. And not, I will continue from the 5 lines from the bottom is where we're up to. Okay. Hu gam kein inyan nachal esan. This is also the inyan of nachal esan. So nachal is a river. Esan, as we're going to learn, means a lot of things. Esan also ultimately means strength, great power. So he's going to say nachal esan shenizbar b'lekut Torah, which is explained in Lekut Torah dibra masla re'ei. So what is the Lekut Torah of that? This is the Lekut Torah of the Alter Rebbe. What does he explain? The b'chinas esan atzmis hachachma. So esan, we're going to find there are many places where esan is used. Like sometimes the Rambam, when he calls the Avram Avinu, he calls esan hagadol, that great power, that great strength. But esan has other meanings as well. I think it means oiz, koyach, and there's another meaning that Chassidus brings, 3 meanings. Got the 3rd one. But it's referring to a very powerful level. Say that he calls that atzmis hachachma, the atzmis of chachma that we're discussing here, gadlus Abba, chachma, in its core level. That's explained elsewhere on the inyan of esan ha'azrachi. So esan ha'azrachi is from Tehillim. Lamnat seyach, is it lamnat seyach esan ha'azrachi? It's one of the kapitlach Tehillim, esan ha'azrachi. And what is this level called?
Maskil esan ha'azrachi.
Maskil, right. Maskil esan ha'azrachi. Sorry, I said lamnat seyach. Maskil esan ha'azrachi, right. So this is called in Kabbalah, hu b'chinas shem ab, she'ena mechudesh, l'mayla meb'chinas shem ma ha'chodesh. Okay, I'll explain what this means. This goes back to the Maimorim. Oh, he says it right after Ba'alesh Gimel in volume 1. If you remember when we spoke about Metzach of Ak, we spoke earlier about the forehead of Adam Kadman. Where was that? The Metzach. Oh yeah, right here by Mitzvos. If you go back to page 1272. On 1272, he spoke about a gili atzmi is different than a regular gili. That the example being metzach, when you see the glow on a person's face, So it's coming from a very profound place. It's coming from the forehead, the glow on Moshe Rabbeinu's face, for example. But what you're seeing is something that's concealed. Yes, you see the example he gave there of a barrel that's filled with wine about to burst, and you see beads of wine outside of the barrel. So even though it's only a bead of wine, only a drop, but that drop is coming from the pressure of the etzem of the yayin within the chovis, within the barrel. So he said the same thing when chachmas adam ter ponov. You see the glow on the face of a wise person. So the glow doesn't tell you anything that's rational, logical. It's not like from the glow you can understand what the teacher is thinking or what's going on in the mind of the metzach. You only see the metzach. If you remember, metzach is only the outer surface. It's the forehead. It's not like the eyes, the ears, the nose, or the mouth, where there's a cavity that in a way is like windows to the soul. There's something that's open. The metzach is closed. The forehead is closed. But still you can see a glow. So he calls that the etzem. When we learned back there, if you remember, he said, Hayetzem mitzcha da'ak, that in Shem Ma HaChodosh, which is atzmis of Chochmah. Why is it called HaChodosh? Because it's something new that comes outside from the etzem. The way it is within the etzem, it's not new. It's in there. But when it gets revealed on the outer dimension, that's called Shema HaChodesh, that comes with Derech Bikiyah. But it becomes the Derech Bikiyah, like it pierces through. So what's piercing through is coming from a very deep level, but what you see on the surface is only the outer expression of it. Like he said, it's Misalim, the Derech Bikiyah. So it pierces through, something pierces through, but it's not a full Gili. So now, this was something we learned at length in volume 1, which he's referring to now. Just referring to page 1272, because he brought it there about mitzvos to show that mitzvos is a gili atzmi. So now he says like this. So let's go back to this page 1279. It says like this. I'm going back. So he says Shem Ab she'ena mechudesh l'mayla. So Shem Ab refers to the highest of the 4 names of Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? The Yud Kei Vav Kei, as we know, in the Miluyim, when you spell it out, it could spell out 45, 52, 63, and 72. That's Shem Ma, Ban, Sag, and Ab. So Shem Ma is what's Begili in Atzilus. But Ma is Bittel, that's the Chochmah of Atzilus. But Atzilus carries within it, it's an expression of the Shem Ab, which is rooted in Ak, in Adam Kadmon. That's why Atzilus has the power to unite and create harmony, hiskalolus, and interconnectivity of all the spheres. Because in it radiates the bittul of Shem Ma, because it's receiving like the glow on the forehead from the inner dimension of Ab, of Adam Kadmon. By contrast, for example, Toihu, which precedes Tikkun, we know there's a lot of energy there, but the containers are small, the energy is large, and it's chaos. It ultimately shatters the containers because there's no balance, there's no bittul. Like we learned back then, Toihu is the Shem Ban, Gematria Behema, a lot of intensity, but it's not balanced, and it's rooted in Shem Sag. So Ma and Ab, the lowest of the names, meaning the lowest as in numbers, Ma Gematria Adam, Bittel, is rooted in Ab and Adam Kadmon. The Ma is Achodesh, Shem Ma Achodesh, because it's a new entity as it comes into Atzilus, is rooted in Shem Ab, which is not Mechudesh, because it's coming from the very core of the essence. It's not a new revelation, but the Shem Ma is drawing from there, like he says here. And in Toyu, where there's no bittul, that's why there's the shattering of the containers. There's no interconnectivity. It's Shem Ban rooted in Sag, which is not relevant to our discussion. I just wanted to put it into context. Shem Ab, Shem Mechus, so B'chinas Shem Ab, which is higher than the Shem HaChodosh that comes down. So that's the meaning of the word Eson. Eson HaZrachi. let me just see the parentheses if I. Yeah, I'm just going to skip the parentheses for a moment. I'm going to go back to it in a minute. Well, I don't know. We have a minute. Well, on the top of page 1280, after the parentheses, he says, this level of eson, of ab, of etzem, atzmis hamoichin, chochmeh, is also nimshach in nachal. What's the nachal? That's the bechinas hamidus. That's the level of Vav He-h. So Yud He being drawn into Vav He-h. I just wanted to round out the picture. He's giving another source. It's a little Kabbalistic, a little dense, but basically what he's explaining is the idea we just learned, that Yud He is coming into Vav He-h and he's bringing more sources for it. From the Nachal Eson, which is Eson Azrachi, like he said, is Shem Ab, I'll read the parentheses just to finish the point, and then we'll stop and stop for questions. V'yeshlema, the Rebbe Rashab says, V'yeshlema, one can say, the Shema Chodesh hu shenimshach b'chinas Shem Ab da'ak, like I just explained. That Shema Chodesh is what is drawn from Shem Ab, which is an ak. Kamoshn is bar le'il dibra maslo ba'aleis chal gimel. Like was discussed earlier, the third Baal Eschal, like he says about him, that's volume 1, the one I was referring to before. But it's coming from the forehead, meaning it's only an outer piercing, and it only pierces to the outer level outside of the Mesach, b'derech b'kiyah, like in a form of piercing, it just breaks through. It's not a full gili. If, for example, God, a person's mind would open up, and the Metzach would no longer be a so-called barrier, then that would not be Pekiah. That's a full gili. Pekiah always means something is piercing through. Like you say, Boikeya hakavis at Tzimtzum. The kav pierces the Tzimtzum. The word Pekiah is a critical word in this case, because it's an expression from there, but it's through piercing through, like almost like a needle that cuts through. The Hainu B'chinas Yisalmus. So that's not a revelation. That's more in a form of concealment. It's something is being revealed, but it's revealed in a way that remains removed from us because we just see the glow. So it's from Metzach the Ak b'derech b'kiyah. Shezeu kedugmas b'chinas chiluf Yud He ba'ad bash. That's an example that is similar to, rather, the exchange of Yud He ba'ad bash, when Yud He through the exchange of Adbash, Aleph Tov Beis Shin, Mem Tzadik instead of Yud He. So that would be what he calls, that would be Shema. That's drawing from Shema. But that's how it's revealed from Eson. Eson itself is the Yud He, or the Shema, that's not renewed, that's not a new entity. That means how it is in its etzem izgalus, its very core revelation, not as it comes through the leap or the piercing, as it comes into Shema. So you see here that this Eson now is referring to a atzmizdika level like la'osid love, that will be revealed in the future, but it's coming into Nachal, it's being revealed in the Midas, like he says the next line on page 1280. The level of Midas. Yud He in Vav He, but Yud He not bechiluf, not as it's exchanged in the name of Ma, but Ab in its purest form. And that, he says, is comparing it to Kibud Av Ve'em, which he's going to explain afterwards. But I'm going to stop here simply because of time and let anybody want to ask anything, clarify anything. But really what he's saying here is just adding sources and more elaboration on the topic that we've learned. So it's not like some new chiddush here. It's a similar idea, except he's talking about on higher levels now. Ab and Ak and Ma and so on. Okay. Any questions?
Is Ab Ak or Ab is coming from Ak?
It says B'chinas Shem Ab, the Ak. That's all he says. It's Shem Ab of Ak. So it's coming from the level of Ak. He didn't say Ak is Ab. but Ab is rooted there. Yeah. If you go back in the Maimer Ba'aleska Hagimel that he referred to, as well as I believe the Maimer that he said before, I just referred to on page 1272. With the Maimer there, he said, "Karboni lachmi vaydaber." He speaks about it more. Barichas there. I'll explain it more tomorrow what this means about atzmi and giluyim. But it's clearly when we talk atzmi, remember, keep in mind the example I've given. It's the inner kavana of the Eibishter in the creation of existence, not the energy that is directed toward creating existence, but the inner atzmi is the kavana within the mashpia, within the etzem. That's what you have to keep in mind. And that's not revealed today. It will be revealed l'asud, but some of it is being revealed in these mitzvahs that he's describing now.
I don't know if you said this, but is this like with the barrel of wine where the droplets are oozing out?
I just said that. I just mentioned that before. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the example he gave back. Gave us back in volume 1.
Okay. Thank you.
It appears the beads of wine on the outside of the barrel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you could see it's very brief and very dense.
And those beads would be like the schar in Olam Hazeh, the Ochel Perotehem Be'olam Hazeh, in the mashal.
Not necessarily.
No? It's not the locus that's seeping through that we're getting by the midos mistaklim ala metzach.
Here it looks like you're getting the actual etzem, because that's Yud K. He said that would be the bikia on this side would be how it's already manifest in Chiluf Yud K, in Vav K.
It's not the inner workings.
Yeah, he's talking getting the Eson itself. You're getting the etzem itself here. But I would wait till we finish this whole subject before speculating on this.
Okay.
He's going to still speak about it till the end of the paragraph. This whole rest of the paragraph is all about this topic. And he's going to connect it to what we learned earlier about how midas affect moichin and moichin affect midas. And always use an example, make it easier to keep honest, so to speak. The example of how emotions are either guided by the mind, but they're still subjective, or the emotions are being elevated to the level of the mind, which is what he's referring to here. It's very important to remember that the emotions, the subjective nature of the emotions means it's still the divine on our terms, not us on God's terms. It's the moichin, the deepest levels of moichin etzem, that brings us to God's terms, which is ultimately what he says kibbutz ve'em is.
So going out on a limb here, practically speaking, or more, I don't know, heuristically, very high level metaphysics philosophy, it's saying essentially kind of a little bit like knowing the mind of God. I mean, it's that high. In other words, how the Eibishter...
Everything we learn in Torah is knowing the mind of God. Why is that such a big statement? That's the whole point of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. We're coming to learn the mind of God. I would go even further. Even science is trying to understand the mind of God. Why is that so surprising?
I don't know. I think when I put it into plain English like that, it seems pretty bold. But you're right. I mean, all the mitzvahs are Ratzon Hashem, and understanding the nature of that Ratzon is still also knowing the mind of God. So I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll stop here. I'm literally on line 2 on page 1280. We stopped at